Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to give everyone 1 more minute to join the webinar, and then we will go ahead and get started. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. We're going to do a little intro, so that should give additional people time to sign on. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar titled How to Solve Customer Dissatisfaction Using Kanban. My name is Lauren Izoni, and I help coordinate the trainings here at CC Pace. Just a little bit about us. We are a 37-year-old IT consulting company. We have 3 main areas of business: Agile services, financial services, and staffing. Under our Agile services umbrella, we have custom development and training and coaching. Within training, we offer both public and private trainings and, of course, our webinars. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them in the question box on your right, and we will answer as many as possible at the conclusion of the webinar. And with that, I will turn it over to our instructor for today's webinar, Jannette Brace.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jannette, and I've been around the industry for a long time, doing everything from designing data warehouses, UML design, Scrum mastering, business analyst, project manager, you name it. It feels like I've been there. And now I have the opportunity to do training and coaching. I've been with CC Pace for about 4 years, and I hope you enjoy this webinar. So with that, let's get started. You know, as I travel around coaching with other organizations, they often are calling CC Pace for help because they know that they've got some issues that they want to deal with. And I'm sure that some of these things are things that your organization as well might have issues with. When you're delivering late and or you try to deliver something, maybe you deliver it on time, but then you find that you have lots of complaints or bugs if you're delivering software. Another big issue for organizations is, you know, they don't have good visibility into the process flow for delivery. And that leads to people, you know, continuing to ask for more. You know, we have that whole who shouts loudest or who has the highest position in the company getting to demand that we add more work to our ever-growing list. And we really believe that that has a lot to do with not having visibility into what's going on. Not having visibility and asking for us to just keep adding work adds to our wait times. And so that can be another source of dissatisfaction. And of course, when you're developing software, you want to actually provide software that's going to meet your customers' needs. So as those needs change, a big issue for the team then becomes that ability to respond quickly enough so you don't lose that opportunity. So as we go through this, think about what your main complaints are, because knowing what you're trying to solve gives an organization great impetus for moving forward. Now, along with all the external type complaints that you might receive, sometimes teams have their own complaints, right? It's very hard to get work done if you're constantly interrupted. The product management group changes the priorities. And, you know, if you remember the story of Chicken Little and the sky is falling, you know, too many times we respond to so-called emergencies and drop everything that we're doing. And that has a high cost impact when it comes to multitasking. So, you know, the sky can't always be falling. Another key thing is, of course, we seem to just, whether it's too many meetings or too many emails, right? We have a lot of overhead in trying to accommodate all of these requests. And in general, some teams just feel like they have too much work, they don't know what to do first, and the changing or competing priorities are a problem there. So think of issues that you're solving both from external stakeholders and your internal folks as well. So, you know, the question really becomes, now you know you have these issues to deal with, is your organization really committed to fixing them? And if they are, then that's, you know, a really great way to start introducing something that's easy to adopt. And that's one of the reasons why we like Kanban so well. Why Kanban? Well, Kanban is said to be evolutionary. And what we mean by that is it's a nice approach that allows us to start with what your organization currently does. We don't, in the Kanban world, tell you you have to reorganize or that it's a silver bullet. What we're looking for is incremental changes so that change isn't so difficult for the organization. So what is Kanban? Hopefully those of you on the call have an idea. Kanban, of course, started with Toyota's manufacturing process back in the 50s and has evolved since then. And Dave Anderson came out with this book, Kanban, the Successful Evolutionary Change for Your Technology Business, where he really took the processes that were going on at Toyota and made them so that they work in a knowledge worker environment. And it's really revolutionized how we use Kanban outside of strictly manufacturing. So Dave Anderson is kind of the go-to guy when it comes to learning about the basics of Kanban. And as we look at today's process, we're going to look at what Mike Burrows did in his book, Kanban from the Inside. So he worked a lot with Dave Anderson and came up with this process. So key principles of Kanban, start with what you do now. Like I said, it's evolutionary, not revolutionary. You don't have to change job titles or reorganize. Just start with what you do now. The next thing is that as a whole, agree that we want to pursue change, right? The third one, it comes to really being able to respect what is going on, not having people try to figure out new roles and responsibilities, and not breaking what is already working in your process. So, you know, those three principles all really go together with a more gentler approach to introducing change. Now, the fourth one here, acts of leadership at every level. You know, we often refer back to Dave Anderson's book where I just showed you the cover with the people standing around. And, you know, some people are busy, some people are starved for work. And at that level, when you look at the work, everyone has the opportunity to step up and advise or brainstorm changes to make us better, to have a voice and say, you know, there's a bottleneck we need to address, or you know, the priorities or the flow isn't working for me. So it doesn't matter whether you're an individual team member or you're in leadership, everyone has a voice. And I think that really dates back to the original Kanban. If anybody studied total quality management, Toyota was what we looked at because they introduced that anybody could stop the line if they thought that there was a problem that needed to be solved, as opposed to delivering a car with quality issues. So those are the foundational principles. We're going to look at the core practices of Kanban, and I'm just giving you the background pieces before we go and tell you a bit more about following this static process. So the core practice, you may have heard, first thing is visualize your flow. So get that up on a board so you can see what the steps are for how you currently do it. And we try to encourage people to look at the system as a whole from the very beginning to the very end and include every bit of steps in the process in that visualization. The next thing that we want you to do is limit your work in process. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. When you start out, simply start with how much work is in process now and include all the work that the team is doing. And that will allow us then to identify where there's a lot of multitasking going on and help us to identify where we may need to reduce those WIP limits to help the flow. So that leads us to managing the flow. If you don't know how frequently you deliver or how long your work is stuck in process, then your lead times are going to grow and your customers are going to find themselves waiting even longer for deliveries. To help make sure that we have total transparency, we want to make policies explicit. And this is an agreement that when we say the work is done for a specific step in the process, it meets these policies and everybody understands it. The next thing is any type of process that falls in the Agile realm needs to have feedback loops. And Kanban believes in having continuous improvement, the Kaizen type of approach where we look and see how are we really doing, and let's get some concrete evidence to see are we making that evolutionary change towards improving. So without a feedback loop, you won't have any way to measure how you're doing. And the sixth one, improve collaboratively, right? This is about getting everybody involved because people that are doing the work are going to have ideas on how to make things better. And you can try little changes and see how they work. You've got your feedback loop, so if they don't work, try something else. And I really like that feeling that we're evolving experimentally to see what works for our organization. So the original question, how do you solve dissatisfaction? Well, Mike Burrows wrote a book covering the static approach. So we want you to take a systems thinking approach to introducing Kanban at your organization. The system being from the time your order, your phone call, your request comes in, all the way through to when we deliver it. And the steps for static are nice and laid out for us, 8 steps. The first step, of course, identifying really what your purpose is and where your weaknesses are so that you can get to the point where we consider you fit for purpose. And I'm going to walk through each of these with a slide. So let's think about, you know, sports is an easy one because we think about fitness and going to the gym. If you're going to, we just watched all these skiers and the ice skaters for the Winter Olympics. It took a lot of practice to get there. And, you know, even in Kanban in your organization, to identify what's going to make you the strongest athlete and the most fit for purpose really takes looking at where your strengths and weaknesses are and looking to improve those weaknesses to get you to a place where the organization is really truly fit for its purpose. The next thing that we do once we know what it will take to be fit for purpose is to start identifying the sources of dissatisfaction. So you've got all those complaints coming in internally and externally. document them, write them down. That will help give us focus, right? We want to work to eliminate things like poor communication. We want to eliminate missed dates so that when you provide a delivery date to a customer, they know and are confident that you're going to deliver. Now you've got those complaints and everything coming in. Now we want to look at how does the demand frequency happen? So here I've just kind of given you a few ideas of sources for your work coming in. We want to know what the demands are so that we can be prepared for them. And you may have other types of demand. You may have, I think I got some of the various natures. It might be, I have the one a week, maybe you get 5 a week, right? Maybe you get things strictly on an annual basis. So map out all the sources of demand for your organization, things that come in, and map them to how frequently they come in, right? So that we can be better prepared, because the next step is to look at, now you know your demand, what are you actually capable of delivering? One of the best case studies that really is highlighted in Dave Anderson's book is about a group at Microsoft. And their demand, it came in all the time. Their backlog just kept getting bigger and bigger. This is called the XIM case study, or XIT, I should say. So, but they were only delivering, some of their work took 6 months to deliver. So the fact that they continued to get this growing backlog, but they weren't capable of delivering any faster. So once you have your sources of demand outlined, now you can start grouping those into how do you deliver? What are you actually capable of delivering in your current process? Now, you've got demand, you've got capability, and we want to actually look at what does the workflow look like. And when you do that, the part to really focus on, you know, here I have the high level. Like orders come in, someone deals with them, orders go out. But that delivery workflow piece is often the black hole that people don't understand. They have a great idea how many teams are involved or what the steps are. But using Kanban, we ask you to visualize that flow itself, each and every step along the way. And we can use flow diagrams, we can add in decision points, right? We can add in other teams' work. So Kanban isn't about just one team, it's about the whole organizational flow. So take and make some stick figures and some drawings and visualize what that workflow is. And this isn't a task to be taken by one person. This is really something that you want to come together and work on so that nothing gets missed along the way. When you map out those workflows, then we want to start looking at grouping our work that's coming in, all that demand that we have built up, and starting to bucket it into specific classes of service. Now, these are some pretty basic ones. If you can group your work all into standard, fixed date, intangible stuff, and expedited, that's all great. And the way I like to describe this is think about when you go on an airplane, they have classes of service. They have first class service, business class service, economy class service. And based on what ticket you bought, how you're treated, where you sit, when you get to board, all of those are attributes based on those classes of service. So when we look at automating things, you know, we may have a standard delivery for that. We may have work that comes in with that fixed date. And the concern with fixed date stuff, standard work, we're going to bring it in, we're going to get it done, we're going to work through it. But to recognize the expectation of a customer when they give you, say, a fixed date item, that we need to make sure that that work gets done. And what happens a lot of times is standard work, well, we'll do it when we can get there. If we don't get it done, it becomes fixed date work, because now we're pushing up against some deadline. And if you miss that deadline, fixed date work becomes expedited work. In Kanban systems, we want to make sure that we're dealing with each type of service in these buckets that allow us to become predictable in our delivery. So we do want to recognize the dates that work is required, so that we can limit those expedited lanes. Too many times all of our work is expedited, and then really none of it has the ability to be expedited, because we fall back into that having too much work to do to deliver. So this is a real discovery process. It takes some time. I don't tend to go in and spend 1 hour and say, okay, bring me all of your work and let's map it out. It takes some time to get there. And you want to keep testing your understanding of your classes of service so that you can identify where you might need to shift things, right? Now, you'll notice that I have all these classes of service pointing to service level agreements. And once we can start bucketing our work into specific classes of service, we can build those policies around it. And we can start doing measurements so that we can identify what service level agreements we can offer to our stakeholders. Whether all work coming in with a standard date, we understand, and I think most of us, even as consumers, experience when you have you call because you have something wrong with your car, and they give you a date to come in, they give you a fixed date to get it out. When you place a call to customer service because your computer has an issue, that might fall into an expedited service. But those organizations know that for every call coming in, they have a certain amount of time to deliver. And by measuring that, they can offer a service level agreement. So your customers start to feel, they know what's going to happen. It's now very transparent on what you're going to give to them. So you don't get there right away. Start with those classes of service, measure, and then help by creating those SLAs. Once you have your flow worked out and you identified your types of work, the next thing is to actually design your Kanban system. And here I've just created a nice simple flow. There might be that you separate development into smaller pieces. Maybe your work needs a discovery phase or an analysis phase. Maybe you're going to add delivery columns to look at when stuff is ready for deployment versus when it has been deployed. And so the columns here need to be very specific to your organization. I tend to believe that no two Kanban systems are the same. That sometimes feels like a stretch, but I know organizations ask, well, don't you have a board already? Well, yeah, you can do a very simple board like this, but when you're actually, if you've visualized your system and you've mapped your flow, when you first start out, you may find you have way more columns than this. It's not unusual to see, 7, 8, 9 steps, particularly when you have dependencies on other teams. So those other teams can have their own board, and the result of their work might feed in to a column on your board. Now, the thing that you'll notice about this board is I've added the reminder to add your WIP limits. This can be done column by column. Pardon me while I take a quick sip of water here. So WIP limits, the simplest way, start with what you have now in process, and we typically will see the numbers above each column of work. So in the development phase, maybe we allow 3 items of work because we have 1 developer. Maybe we allow 6 items of work because we have 4 developers. You might notice a trend there. You know, one-on-one is a low WIP limit, 1 work item for every person, but sometimes we find that if work is waiting for an answer or for some other resource, you might want to have 1.5 times. You can add little icons for the number of people in each column to represent the number of resources. These could be simple little stick figures. They could be maybe each team member picks a Disney character, for instance. So you really can tailor these. But when you have an idea of the number of resources that can do the work in each column, it does help set your WIP limits. You want each column to have a WIP limit, and some of those WIP limits may be infinite. The done column, for instance, or the accepted column. So actually in the done, sometimes I have to impose WIP limits to try to get the leadership team or the product owner, if you have a product owner, to do the acceptance piece so that we keep the work flowing. And through using metrics, then as we reduce those WIP limits, we can see if it's helping us with our delivery capabilities. Another item to add to your basic Kanban board is exit criteria. And these would be at each column. Again, for testing, it could be that it's fully integrated tested, that it's regression tested, maybe as part of development, it's unit tested or documented. So those types of items belong at the for each column. On a manual board, we tend to put them down at the bottom end. You can also have a big flip chart sticky. If you have a manual board and you're all in a co-located office, put a flip chart piece of paper up. What are the exit criteria for each item? And of course, most interesting for those of you that don't know a lot about Kanban, you might be wondering, what's that green thing that looks like a garbage can? So often we tend to think of everything in our backlog as something that is going to add value, that is a necessity that we must do. And one of the ideas in Kanban is that you need a discard rate. You need to be able to validate that the work we're assigning to the team is still valid, especially if your backlog's big and the item has been there for a very long time. So all of the work coming into the system here on my board starts out in an ideas column. Could be ideas for new products, ideas for innovation, and ideas for improvement. And just because an item is in our ideas column doesn't mean that we're actually going to pick it up and work on it. That line between ideas and selected gives us an opportunity to say yes or no. Is this something coming in? So you have a validation process. And for the team, the work isn't committed to be worked on until it's made it into the selected column. Once the team is committed to bring it into their workflow, that's when we can start looking at our lead time. That's when the agreement has happened that says we know everything that we're going to know. You may have a different commitment point, but you definitely want to know, as opposed to just a bunch of work being there without a priority, with maybe not being ready to start on, that there is a gating type criteria. And it's perfectly okay to have some of those items be discarded before they're selected and committed to being worked on. So those are some key things I look for in a Kanban board. It tells me whether or not somebody's just got tasks up on a wall or whether they're actually trying to implement something more along a Kanban line. So you get your Kanban system up, you have all the work mapped out, and you start placing the work that is in process into the right columns, and you start measuring. And the measuring can be done, of course, if you have a tool, it's going to tell you how much time you've spent working on it. If you don't have a tool, put tally marks on it. And in fact, you might do tally marks in green for every day that someone touches a work item and spends work on it. And you might add tally marks in red, for instance, if it's just sitting there waiting, because being able to reduce wait time when an item's sitting around not being worked on can help with reduce your delivery time as well. So my board's designed, my work is on it. We've been doing this as a team across the organization, but we really want to start bringing that idea to everyone. So socialize it and get more feedback. Include key stakeholders so that we make sure that we're not missing anything. And what I really like is that this gives us that opportunity. You know, we have the feedback loop. We're continuing to test our hypothesis that we've not missed anything, and we can update if needed. Now, you've socialized your design. How do you manage how you're actually doing? There's a great formula out there, and Little's Law really helps us figure out what happens when we reduce our WIP limit, because Little's Law measures the lead time, right, based on how much work you really have in process and what your throughput is. Now you can have a measurement ideally for each class of service. So I have 5 items in my work in process throughout my whole entire board. I deliver 1 item per week. I'm going to take 5 weeks to get it done. I deliver 1 item per hour. It's going to take 5 hours to get it done. And if you've ever been to, Seattle doesn't have very many of them, but the chicken place, and why does the name escape me? Sorry, guys. One of the best things I've noticed as I travel around and I eat out and I go to restaurants is how organizations deal with the bottlenecks that they have. So when they find that their throughput, isn't keeping up with demand, then we can start addressing those bottlenecks. And if you've ever been, even McDonald's has multiple lines now, so you can place your order. And we see that organizations find that isn't enough. And so they'll add order takers out there with their remote pad, because they've determined that if they get the orders into the kitchen faster, then their throughput increases because they're just collecting the money and handing out the food. So when you know how much work you have in process, what your delivery rate is, your throughput, then this will help with creating your SLAs based on lead time. Now, if you've measured lead time and you know what your throughput is, of course, then you can start reducing your WIP limits or increasing your WIP limits and seeing how those numbers change. So Little's Law gives us mathematical proof that we can use to see whether or not what we're doing is helping us or hindering. and gives us that way to implement evolutionary change through our feedback loop and making adjustments. If you've ever found yourself standing in line to get your favorite coffee and the line is very long, there's more probability that the lead time is going to go up. So if you're used to walking in and getting coffee, and there's only 2 people in line, you're pretty sure how long it's going to take you to get your coffee. But when there's 15 people in line, you really don't know, because you don't know the work that's involved for each of those 15 people. Are they going to order a drip coffee? Are they going to order a mocha frappuccino? And so just visually thinking of work hues and how we need to remove bottlenecks to improve that throughput, it gives you that overall, how does Little's Law help us? Now, once you've done all this, of course, the goal is solving those dissatisfaction points. And when it comes to management behavior, what I'm really looking for here is we've provided leadership with the big picture. They can see the work moving through. We're transparent. And now management can take that leadership role in helping us streamline our work and in how they work with the team to enable change and improvement. So, you know, as you work, you also want to remember you're socializing and evangelizing this evolutionary way of making improvements. So check back, how is it working? The other thing you'll want to look at is with your customers, right? Has how they respond to you changed? Are they happy with the improvements that you're making? Do they feel that when you make a commitment to deliver, you're going to be on time? And when they have that predictability, we can start using that when we negotiate their contracts, when we make commitments to them, because we have real information. We're not just hoping that if we scream louder, work overtime, perform active heroics, that we're going to start meeting them. And so that really comes down to the 4th item, is have the way that you deliver from start to finish, has the model changed, help us improve in what we do. So that's the overview of the STATIK process as provided by Mike Burrows, and a little introduction to Kanban as provided by Dave Anderson. So I welcome you to think about how all those things impact your business. And Lauren's going to talk about these upcoming classes. I want to let you know that we do offer Kanban classes publicly, but that the real benefit in working with Kanban is to work with your team and help your team through these steps so that they can address all the customers' dissatisfaction and internal dissatisfaction by following some basic Kanban principles. Lauren, I think we were supposed to have a question slide. Let's see. Oh, there you go. After you get to talk about classes.
Yep.
So,
yep. Great. Thanks, Jannette. Yeah, we just wanted to let you guys know about our upcoming public courses. As Jannette mentioned, we do have public Kanban courses, so please feel free to either reach out to me or just check our website, and it is always up to date, so we should have some of them on the schedule in the future. But we do have a CSM class, Certified Scrum Master course, next week. We do still have a couple of spots available, so certainly can still sign up. And as you can see kind of in that orange star, for attending the webinar, we'd like to give you 10% off of that course. So you just use the code webinar10 at checkout and you get that, that savings. The other thing I wanted to draw your attention to is we are having a free CSM social after our Kanban class. You do not need to attend the Kanban class. It's free for anyone to attend. It'll be in that evening on the 28th. And basically, we'd love to hear from you, any success stories, or if you have any Agile questions you need answers to, or you just need advice from an Agile expert. We're going to have Bob Schatz joining us, who is one of our leading Agile transformation experts. He also does a lot of our CSM classes for us. Bob will be answering all of your burning Agile questions, and you'll have a chance to learn from and network and share your Agile experience with other Agilists in the DC area. So it's going to be kind of a casual environment. We welcome anybody who would like to attend to sign up right on our website, or like I said, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or want to sign up for anything. I can always help. And then obviously we have one more CSM class coming up in May, so plenty of time to sign up for that as well. And you can, of course, use that 10% off code. So with that, Jannette, let's head to the questions.
Awesome. And what I encourage you to do, if you have a question, type it into the chat window. And then if I want to get more information, I can ask that person to speak up so that we don't have 30 people trying to speak at the same time.
Sounds great. Yeah, so either in the chat box or the question box, either one, we will see them. Okay, so our first question, Jannette, is what are some of the differences between Kanban and Scrum?
A great question. You know, so, in Scrum, we typically ask straight away for your team to be reorganized so that, first of all, you need to have a Scrum Master and a product owner. And then we really want a cross-functional team in software, it's our dev test folks. And we want those to be as fungible as possible so that each team can deliver the work from start to finish. In Kanban, we don't ask you to do that. We start with what you have now. So there's no need to say, you know, oh, do I have to hire a Scrum Master? No, you don't have to hire a Scrum Master. Well, how does the work get prioritized? Well, how does the work get prioritized now, right? So actually, you know, in the industry, sometimes we call Kanban easy agile because you can start with what you have now. In Scrum, if you're familiar with Scrum, you might have heard of Scrum events, the daily stand-up, sprint planning, some of those kinds of things. In Kanban, once we get established, then we have some key meetings that we look at, like that meeting to go through the ideas and commit to them, so keeping that backlog flowing. We do set up Kaizen meetings to get continuous feedback. And in fact, some organizations combine Scrum and Kanban. They might use the Scrum events, but it's not necessary from the beginning. So Kanban is just another recipe and fits some teams better than others. Some teams that are doing Scrum find working in 2-week sprints or 3-week sprints or 1-week sprints very difficult. In Kanban, we don't work in sprints. It's a continuous flow. And the way that we identify how good we're doing is really goes back to those classes of service and SLAs. And are we meeting them and are we improving on them?
Great, thanks, Jannette. Our next question is Kanban agile?
Yeah, another good question. You know, Agile really is a wonderful foundation and a way of thinking and doing work that applies no matter what methodology that you're doing. Scrum came out before the Agile Manifesto came out, and Kanban falls into that. It's Agile. Like many methodologies that we do fall into the Agile umbrella. So yes.
Great. All right. Well, that is all the questions we have submitted. So with that, I think we'll just go ahead and say thanks you to Jannette for presenting this great Kanban webinar today. And as I mentioned, you guys will get a follow-up email with a link to our website in case you guys want to sign up for any of those public courses that we discussed earlier. And thanks everyone for attending. Thanks, Jannette.
Thank you, everyone.